Why has a man identified by police as the alleged head of a major organised crime network been able to remain out of reach for so many years, despite repeated efforts to locate him? It is a question that has lingered over Western Sydney, shaping public perception of organised crime and exposing gaps in the way such networks adapt to avoid disruption. The name associated with this group rarely appeared in public spaces, yet the influence attributed to him has been referenced in numerous investigations, court documents, and law enforcement statements. Understanding how this situation developed requires observing the environment in which these events unfolded and the pattern of incidents that drew national attention. Residents across Western Sydney became familiar with the network not through a single defining incident, but through a steady series of events that suggested the presence of an organised structure operating behind the scenes. Reports of late-night shootings, unexplained gatherings, and rapid police deployments began to surface in multiple suburbs. None of these incidents seemed extraordinary on their own. Western Sydney is a large, diverse area, and police activity is not uncommon. But as these reports accumulated over time, they revealed something more coordinated than isolated criminal acts. Several incidents involved what police described as targeted attacks linked to ongoing conflicts between criminal groups. Others centered on alleged drug distribution sites hidden within ordinary residential streets. There were cases where officers seized cash, encrypted devices, or vehicles believed to be connected to the network's operations. In each instance, the discovery prompted more questions about the extent of the organisation and the individuals directing it. Community members followed these developments closely, noting the tension between the normality of suburban life and the seriousness of the allegations unfolding around them. Attempts to intervene at higher levels of the organisation were frequent. Police carried out raids at properties scattered across Western Sydney, often in coordinated operations involving specialist units. During these efforts, officers arrested individuals at various levels of involvement and seized materials believed to be part of the network's broader structure. Yet, despite the number of arrests and the scale of the operations, the man investigators described as the group's primary decision-maker remained outside their reach. His absence became a defining feature of the story, raising ongoing curiosity about how someone alleged to hold such influence could continue to evade capture. Police statements indicated that several operations were developed with the intention of intercepting him, both directly and indirectly. These attempts were shaped by intelligence suggesting his movements, his contacts, and his potential locations overseas. In practice, however, the complexity of the network presented significant challenges. Individuals who might have provided information were often reluctant to speak. Communication methods were designed to minimize traceability. The network's internal structure shifted over time, creating layers that made it difficult to connect operational activities to the person investigators believed sat at the top. Each unsuccessful attempt added to the public's interest in the case. For many residents, the question was not simply why he had not been found, but how the network had been able to operate so effectively in suburbs that otherwise appeared stable and predictable. Western Sydney is known for its strong sense of community, shaped by generations of families, migrants, and working-class neighbourhoods. The idea that an organised crime group could function within this environment for so long created a sense of unease that was quiet but persistent. It suggested that the activities attributed to the network were not distant or abstract, but embedded within places people recognised and travelled through daily. The criminal incidents linked to the group were often described by police as deliberate, calculated, and directed at rivals rather than at random members of the public. That distinction, however, did little to ease concerns. Even targeted violence can create ripple effects that reach far beyond the individuals involved. Families living near affected areas expressed worry about their safety, particularly after incidents that occurred close to busy streets or community spaces. Local business owners recalled periods of increased police presence and uncertainty about whether further incidents might follow. Law enforcement officials approached the investigations with caution, emphasizing the need for accurate intelligence and sustained effort. Officers involved in the operations acknowledged the difficulties posed by a network capable of adapting quickly to avoid disruption. They described a structure that relied on mobility, compartmentalization, and the willing cooperation of individuals who moved between different levels of involvement. Traditional methods of investigation were often insufficient, requiring a combination of surveillance, digital analysis, financial tracking, and international cooperation. These elements contributed to the slow pace of progress and to the perception that the alleged leader remained difficult to access. Through these developments, the public's understanding of the situation became shaped less by speculation and more by the gradual emergence of verifiable details. Each raid, arrest, and court proceeding added clarity to the broader picture. It showed how an organization could embed itself within ordinary suburbs, using familiar environments to conceal activities that extended far beyond the local area. The absence of the alleged leader did not diminish the seriousness of the activities attributed to the network. Instead, it highlighted the challenges faced by authorities attempting to dismantle an entity that operated across multiple fronts. As more information surfaced, curiosity and caution developed side by side. Residents recognized that the network's presence had influenced their communities in ways not always visible. The repeated efforts to intervene, the scale of police operations, and the continuing absence of the individual identified as the network's alleged head all contributed to a narrative marked by complexity rather than simplicity. This introduction establishes the groundwork for understanding how such a network emerged, how it sustained itself, and why its alleged leader remained an elusive figure despite years of investigation. Western Sydney has long been shaped by forces that extend beyond individual suburbs or isolated incidents, forming a social environment defined by complexity, resilience, and significant demographic change. The region includes some of the most culturally diverse communities in the country, the result of decades of migration from the Middle East, South Asia, East Asia, and various parts of Europe. For many families, Western Sydney represented affordability and opportunity, offering access to employment, schooling, and community networks that supported new arrivals as they settled into Australian life. This diversity brought strength, but it also created conditions in which social pressures were unevenly experienced. Economic transitions over several decades shifted the types of work available, leading to periods of instability for communities that relied on industries undergoing change. Population growth outpaced infrastructure in many suburbs, placing pressure on local services and contributing to a sense of imbalance between rapid development and limited resources. While most residents adapted to these circumstances through strong family structures and community support, gaps emerged for individuals who felt disconnected from education pathways, employment prospects, or established social institutions. These dynamics created an environment in which some young people became vulnerable to alternative influences that offered identity, belonging, or perceived opportunity. Cultural expectations also played a role. Families arriving from conflict zones or regions with limited institutional trust often carried complex experiences that shaped their interactions with authority. The mix of multilingual households, intergenerational differences, and varying levels of economic security contributed to a landscape in which community cohesion was strong but not uniform. As suburbs expanded, informal hierarchies and social circles formed naturally, particularly among younger residents seeking connection in an environment where traditional markers of success could feel distant. Against this backdrop, The early appearance of gang-affiliated behaviour in parts of Western Sydney was not driven by a single cause. It reflected a combination of economic pressure, social fragmentation, and the growing influence of cross-border criminal markets. Some individuals became involved in groups that initially operated at a low level, engaging in activities such as small-scale drug distribution or low-risk financial schemes. Over time, the presence of more organised actors, including those with ties to overseas networks, transformed these groups into structures with defined roles, expectations, and methods. This shift coincided with changes in how illicit substances moved through Australian cities. Demand increased, supply chains became more sophisticated, and technology enabled communication systems that concealed leadership and minimised exposure. Western Sydney's geography also played a subtle role in shaping gang activity. With large residential areas, industrial estates, transport corridors, and easy access to major motorways, the region provided logistical advantages for groups seeking to operate discreetly. Small clusters of streets in otherwise quiet suburbs allowed individuals to blend in without drawing attention. Local knowledge of neighbourhood patterns enabled members to navigate the area with confidence, while the transient nature of some populations made it harder for outsiders to detect unusual behaviour. These conditions contributed to the formation of what law enforcement agencies classify as organised crime networks, or OCNs. In the Australian context, an OCN is not defined solely by size or notoriety, but by its ability to sustain criminal activity through coordinated roles, financial systems, and protective structures that limit detection. OCNs commonly rely on compartmentalization, with individuals aware only of the tasks assigned to them, reducing the risk that operational knowledge can be exposed if one person is arrested or questioned. They also adapt quickly, shifting communication methods, adjusting supply lines, and replacing members as needed. Australian OCNs differ from those in some other countries, in that they often lack a highly visible public identity. Instead of overt symbols or hierarchical displays, many operate through quiet networks embedded in residential and commercial environments, making detection more reliant on intelligence than on public presence. Their operations may include drug distribution, money laundering, extortion, or logistical support for overseas groups, but these activities are structured to appear disconnected unless viewed through substantial investigative work. Effective OCNs minimize visibility, maintain financial resilience, and rely on trusted interpersonal relationships formed over years within migrant communities, extended family groups, or social circles shaped by shared backgrounds and experiences. The rise of such structures in Western Sydney did not occur in a vacuum. It reflected wider social pressures that influenced how certain individuals navigated opportunities and limitations. For some, the appeal of gang involvement stemmed from a desire for status or belonging in environments where traditional pathways felt inaccessible. For others, financial motivation drove participation in networks that promised rapid income in contrast to limited employment prospects. These motivations were not universal and did not represent the broader community, which overwhelmingly rejected criminal behaviour. But they contributed to the persistence of gang-affiliated groups within particular pockets of the region. Across the decades, the presence of OCNs in Western Sydney became an evolving challenge for law enforcement. Agencies monitored changes in communication methods, noting the shift from street-level meetings to encrypted messaging platforms. They documented the fragmentation of groups as older members were arrested or displaced, and younger individuals stepped into newly vacant roles. They observed how overseas connections shaped local operations, creating a flow of information and resources that extended beyond Australia's borders. Despite these developments, most residents continued their daily lives with limited awareness of the underlying structures operating around them. Suburbs remained defined by schools, businesses, parks, and families, not by crime. But within that ordinary landscape, the conditions that allowed OCNs to develop remained present: pockets of disadvantage, transitional populations, and the capacity for small groups to exploit technological and social gaps. This context forms the foundation through which the emergence of specific networks can be understood, revealing how organized crime became embedded within areas that outwardly appeared stable and familiar. The development of the Alameddine network emerged gradually, rather than through a single transformative moment, shaped by the environment in which the family lived and the relationships formed across Western Sydney over several decades. The Alameddine family, like many others who settled in the region, came from a background marked by migration, cultural transition, and the search for stability in an expanding urban landscape. Public records and reporting have referenced various branches of the family spread across multiple suburbs, reflecting a structure that was less a unified household and more an extended network of relatives, acquaintances, and social connections. These links were typical of many migrant families who relied on broad community ties, but in this case, certain individuals within the wider family would become associated with activities that extended beyond ordinary suburban life. It is important to note that the association of some family members with criminal allegations did not represent the family as a whole. Instead, individuals who later became subjects of police interest appeared to have diverged from conventional pathways during a period when Western Sydney was experiencing economic and social pressures that affected young people unevenly. Within this environment, inconsistencies began to appear in the behaviour of certain individuals connected to the family. These inconsistencies were not immediately visible to the broader community, but became noticeable through the lens of police investigations that unfolded over time. Reports referenced patterns such as unexplained financial movements, rapid changes in social status, and the formation of close-knit groups that grew increasingly insular. While none of these elements were definitive on their own, collectively, they suggested that some individuals were operating within circles shaped by motivations distinct from those of their peers. These early inconsistencies laid the groundwork for the formation of a more structured network. Recruitment into this emerging group did not follow a formal process, but evolved through personal relationships, shared experiences, and perceived opportunities. Individuals who felt disconnected from mainstream economic or social systems found a sense of belonging within smaller circles that valued loyalty, discretion, and initiative. Over time, these groups solidified into operational units, each responsible for specific tasks. This structure allowed the network to operate with minimal visibility while maintaining internal cohesion, as members understood the importance of avoiding unnecessary attention. The network's internal dynamics, as described in various investigations, reflected a decentralized hierarchy. At the top were individuals alleged to have influenced major decisions relating to supply, coordination, and finance. Beneath them were operational managers who oversaw logistics, communication, and distribution. At the lower levels were individuals responsible for transport, storage, or street-level activities. This compartmentalized approach ensured that most members held limited knowledge of the wider network, reducing exposure and complicating law enforcement efforts. Expansion did not occur through overt displays of power, but through quiet, sustained growth. Access to resources increased as the network identified new opportunities, often influenced by shifts in the broader illicit market. Individuals with specific skills or connections were integrated into the structure, whether through family relationships, social ties, or shared community backgrounds. This expansion was not uniform. It adapted to circumstances, responding to both internal pressures and external threats. Technology played a significant role in the network's evolution. As digital communication became more accessible, individuals within the group began using encrypted messaging platforms, shared devices, and temporary communication methods that limited traceability. These tools provided a layer of protection and allowed coordination across distances without the need for physical meetings. In some cases, the adoption of new technology outpaced law enforcement capabilities, enabling the network to operate with a degree of confidence that would have been far more difficult in earlier decades. Social media also contributed to the group's development. While not always used directly for coordination, online platforms shaped the identities and social dynamics of younger members. These platforms allowed individuals to project images of status, reinforce social bonds, or observe the activities of peers in other regions. In some cases, online interactions revealed shifting alliances or emerging tensions that later became relevant to police investigations. Although the network generally avoided overt public exposure, the influence of digital culture played a role in shaping the behavior and decisions of individuals involved. Overseas connections further strengthened the network's resilience. Reports and statements from authorities have noted links between certain individuals and contacts in countries where extended family networks existed. These connections facilitated financial transfers, communication, and the movement of resources. The presence of overseas ties also complicated law enforcement efforts, as individuals who travelled outside Australia were often beyond the immediate reach of local authorities. These international links did not necessarily form a rigid cross-border structure, but created enough distance to provide operational advantages, especially when local investigations intensified. As the network expanded, its operations became increasingly sophisticated. Individuals adapted quickly to law enforcement methods, adjusting communication practices, changing meeting locations, and rotating roles to minimize detection. The group's capacity to recruit new members allowed it to maintain momentum even when certain individuals were arrested or charged. This adaptability reflected a broader trend seen in organised crime networks across Australia, where flexibility, compartmentalisation, and strategic use of community connections formed the foundation of long-term survival. The emergence of the Alameddine network cannot be viewed in isolation. It developed through a complex combination of family relationships, social environments, shifting opportunities, and evolving criminal markets. The network's formation was gradual, shaped by individuals who navigated their surroundings in ways that diverged from mainstream pathways. By embedding itself within familiar suburban spaces while maintaining protective layers of technology, loyalty, and strategic connections, the network established a presence that would later become the subject of extensive investigations and public scrutiny. Rafat Alameddine has been referenced in police material and public reporting as the alleged head of a network that developed across Western Sydney over several years. His background, as understood through available information, reflects a mixture of family connections, community ties, and shifting social environments that shaped his early years. He grew up in a part of Sydney marked by dense cultural diversity, where many families built new lives after periods of migration. Within this setting, he maintained connections typical of extended households in the region, participating in local networks that formed naturally around schools, community groups, and neighbourhood associations. These early associations, while unremarkable on the surface, placed him in proximity to individuals who would later become central to the network's operations. Nothing in the limited biographical material publicly available suggests a clear point at which he transitioned from ordinary community life to activities now outlined in law enforcement allegations. Instead, investigators have described a gradual shift in his associations, influence, and behaviour, shaped by the evolving dynamics of Western Sydney and the opportunities that arose within its informal networks. Police allegations have identified Rafat as someone who moved into a leadership role as the group expanded, overseeing decisions related to supply chains, coordination, and financial flows. This role, as described by investigators, positioned him not as a visible figure operating openly in the community, but as someone who preferred distance and discretion. Individuals at the operational level were often more exposed, while decision-making was attributed to figures higher in the structure who rarely appeared in public contexts connected to the network. Law enforcement sources have suggested that Rafat's influence stemmed not from overt displays of authority, but from his ability to direct activities through a layered hierarchy, where instructions filtered through trusted intermediaries rather than direct communication with those engaged in street-level tasks. This indirect leadership style contributed to the network's resilience, allowing it to continue functioning even when members were arrested or operations were disrupted. Investigators have noted that individuals who allegedly held senior positions were often capable of shifting roles, locations, or communication methods in response to changes in police activity. Rafat's alleged leadership role reflected this broader pattern, making it difficult for authorities to establish clear lines of accountability or trace his involvement through conventional means. The most significant shift in the narrative surrounding Rafat occurred when he left Australia, with police later alleging that he had travelled to Lebanon. Reports indicated that once he was overseas, attempts to apprehend him became substantially more complex. Lebanon's legal and diplomatic framework created challenges for extradition, and individuals who relocate to countries without extradition arrangements often remain outside the immediate reach of Australian law enforcement. This geographical distance provided a layer of protection that complicated ongoing investigations. Police statements have referred to the difficulty of locating individuals who operate across borders, particularly when they maintain connections that allow them to influence activities or communicate with associates without physically returning to Australia. While public reporting has not detailed the precise circumstances of Rafat's departure, the fact that he left before key operations took place contributed to the enduring nature of the case. His presence overseas shaped the direction of subsequent investigations, prompting authorities to place greater emphasis on dismantling the local structure of the network rather than relying on the ability to apprehend a single figure. Several warrants have been issued for Rafat's arrest, reflecting allegations relating to serious criminal conduct. These warrants signify the level of police interest in his activities and function as a formal declaration of the offences authorities believe they can substantiate. However, a warrant is only effective when the individual is within a jurisdiction that recognises and enforces it. In Rafat's case, the alleged relocation to Lebanon has limited the capacity of Australian police to act directly. Investigators have continued gathering intelligence, monitoring potential communication channels, and assessing whether circumstances may eventually change. But the practical obstacles remain considerable. The difficulty in apprehending Rafat has contributed to his reputation as an elusive figure, though this perception is shaped more by the constraints of international law than by any public actions on his part. Police have been careful to frame him as an individual subject to specific allegations rather than a symbolic figure, yet his absence has inevitably led to speculation and public interest. Within the context of organised crime networks, elusive leadership often becomes a focal point because it reflects the underlying structure of the group. When the person alleged to be directing activities remains inaccessible, it reinforces the perception that the network is capable of adapting and operating independently of any single member. This perception, combined with the scale of the allegations, has contributed to Rafat's status as a central figure in discussions surrounding the network. His position is not defined by publicity or self-promotion, but by the role attributed to him through investigative findings and court materials. Over time, Rafat's alleged involvement and continued absence from Australia have made him a significant reference point in understanding how the network evolved and sustained itself. His name appears less in sensational headlines and more in the structured language of court documents, police statements, and investigative reports. This reinforces the nature of his presence within the narrative: distant, indirect, and framed by allegation rather than public visibility. For many observers, Rafat represents the complexities of organized crime networks that navigate both community ties and international connections. His alleged role highlights how leadership can be exercised without physical proximity, relying instead on relationships, trust, and a tiered structure that distributes responsibility across multiple levels. While his personal background remains largely undocumented in public sources, his alleged impact on the network is defined through the actions of those around him and the investigations that have unfolded in his absence. The combination of distance, alleged influence, and unresolved legal issues has led to a form of symbolic significance, where his name functions as a shorthand for the challenges faced by authorities in addressing sophisticated criminal groups. This significance, however, remains rooted in the factual landscape of the case, shaped by the allegations made against him and the operational realities encountered by police. The broader understanding of the network attributed to the Alameddine group is shaped not only by the figure alleged to sit at its highest level, but also by the individuals who, according to police, played significant roles in maintaining operations across Western Sydney. These individuals varied in background, responsibilities, and visibility, yet each contributed to the structure that investigators later sought to dismantle. Among them, several names have been repeatedly referenced in court material and reporting, forming a constellation of senior figures whose actions and associations reveal how the network functioned on a day-to-day basis. And one of the most prominent individuals within this tier is Talal Alameddine. His presence in public discourse emerged long before the network reached its peak expansion, due to an earlier criminal conviction that placed him under sustained law enforcement scrutiny. Talal's trajectory, as documented in court proceedings, reflects a pattern different from that of other family-connected figures, with his most significant conviction relating to the supply of a firearm used in a high-profile terrorism incident. While the nature of that matter is separate from the activities attributed to the organised crime network, his criminal history became part of the broader narrative that investigators examined when assessing the potential influence of various individuals. Police have alleged that Talal's standing within parts of the community and his connections to individuals across different suburbs positioned him as someone capable of influencing younger associates. Reports have suggested that his involvement, whether direct or peripheral, contributed to the perception that the network included individuals with varied backgrounds and experiences, some of whom had already interacted with the criminal justice system in significant ways. Another figure repeatedly referenced in investigations is Ali Younes, known publicly by his stage name, I Huncho. Unlike other individuals linked to the network, Younes held a parallel presence in the entertainment industry as a rapper, with a public profile shaped by social media and music platforms. His involvement in the network, as alleged by police, related not to artistic activity, but to his connections with individuals already engaged in operational roles. Investigators have suggested that Younes' status, particularly among younger audiences, may have contributed to his influence within certain circles. While public visibility does not inherently indicate criminal involvement, police allegations indicated that his social positioning allowed him to maintain relationships that extended beyond the music industry. His arrest on charges relating to drug supply drew substantial attention because it bridged two worlds that rarely intersect publicly: the entertainment sphere and organized criminal activity. His case demonstrated how the network's reach was not confined to traditional criminal spaces, but could extend into cultural environments shaped by online influence and personal branding. Police have described Younes as someone who interacted extensively with peers in Western Sydney's youth culture, making him relevant to the network's ability to recruit and maintain younger members. Another key figure in police allegations is John Ray Baisari, whose name appears frequently in connection with serious accusations relating to organised criminal conduct. Baisari has been described by investigators as an individual with close operational ties to the alleged leadership and as someone involved in coordinating activities that required trust, discretion, and strategic planning. Reports have stated that Baisari's role included facilitating communication, overseeing specific operations, and being present during periods of heightened activity within the group. His alleged involvement in plots targeting rival individuals within the criminal landscape positioned him as a central figure in understanding how the network responded to perceived threats. Police have emphasized that Baisari's operational capacity, rather than any public persona, defined his significance within the group. His mobility, ability to move between locations, and connections to multiple associates created a layer of complexity for investigators attempting to track the network's internal decision-making. The organisation attributed to the group extended beyond named individuals, however. One of the most significant components identified by investigators was a network of mobile phones used to manage drug distribution. Police described these devices as dedicated lines operated not by a single person, but by small teams responsible for receiving orders, coordinating deliveries, and maintaining customer lists. The use of these phones demonstrated a level of organisation that exceeded typical street-level dealing. Investigators identified a system in which controlled devices acted as central hubs for communication, with individuals answering calls, logging requests, and directing couriers to specific drop-off locations. The phones functioned almost like small businesses, with designated personnel assigned to shifts and procedures aimed at limiting unnecessary exposure. They were often passed between operators, making it difficult for police to attribute control to a single person. This decentralized approach allowed the network to manage large-scale distribution without relying on visible points of contact. When police executed coordinated raids targeting these phones, they reported seizing devices linked to tens of thousands of customer interactions, illustrating the volume and systematic nature of the operations. While the individuals operating the phones rarely appeared in public reporting, their role was essential to maintaining the consistency and scale of the network's activities. Beyond the communication systems, the network also relied on individuals involved in financial management and logistics, forming a layer of support that enabled ongoing operations. This group, often referred to in investigations as money managers or logistics coordinators, handled tasks such as collecting proceeds, arranging storage locations, and ensuring the movement of goods across suburban areas. Their responsibilities included maintaining safe houses, coordinating vehicle use, and managing operational expenses. Some were involved in structuring money transfers to minimize detection, using methods such as informal value transfer systems, cash-based exchanges, and small business fronts that allowed funds to be absorbed into local economies. The work of these individuals was rarely visible, but formed the structural backbone that sustained the network. Logistics teams adapted rapidly to disruptions, shifting storage sites, changing communication pathways, and rotating personnel whenever police activity increased. The combined efforts of these various senior and operational figures reveal the layered nature of the network. The presence of individuals like Talal Alameddine, Ali Yunus, and John Ray Baisari, alongside specialized teams responsible for communication, money handling, and logistics, demonstrates how the organization evolved beyond informal associations. Each figure contributed in different ways, shaping a structure capable of operating discreetly yet effectively within suburban environments. Their roles, as outlined in law enforcement allegations, represent a collective system rather than isolated individuals, reflecting a network designed to withstand pressure and adapt to changing circumstances. The operational structure attributed to the network evolved into a system that investigators later described as one of the most organised and sustained drug distribution models uncovered in Western Sydney. At the centre of this system was a series of dedicated phone lines, referred to in police material as drug hotlines. These phones were not linked to individual dealers in the traditional sense, but operated as central communication hubs through which orders were received, recorded, and directed. The hotline model relied on consistency, predictability, and the ability to operate throughout the day with minimal disruption. Individuals assigned to these phones worked in shifts, answering calls, messaging customers, and maintaining an ongoing schedule of deliveries that required coordinated support across several suburbs. The phones were treated almost as commercial assets, managed with the expectation of reliability and customer retention, reflecting a shift from street-based dealing to a service-driven distribution model. As the network expanded, the number of customers linked to the hotline system grew significantly. When police eventually seized multiple devices during coordinated raids, they reported that the combined data suggested interactions with tens of thousands of customers. While not every contact represented an active user, the scale indicated a model built on widespread distribution rather than limited or personalized supply. The operation functioned in a way that mirrored legitimate delivery services, with orders processed quickly and couriers dispatched to predetermined locations. This efficiency depended on a clear division of responsibilities, with the hotline operators acting as dispatchers and the couriers executing deliveries with limited direct communication beyond the instructions given. Customer management formed a substantial part of the hotline system. Operators maintained lists of regular clients, noted preferred meeting points, and recorded patterns in orders that could assist in planning. Communication was brief and transactional, designed to minimize digital traces while retaining enough detail to maintain continuity. Operators used temporary messaging systems and frequently replaced devices to reduce the chance of surveillance. Payment arrangements varied depending on the individual customer, with some paying upfront while others operated on informal credit systems, though credit was typically restricted to known clients with established histories. Information collected through these interactions was handled carefully, reflecting the network's awareness of how data could expose operational weaknesses. The chain of roles supporting this system was structured but flexible, enabling the network to sustain high volumes of activity. At the operational level were the couriers, who received instructions from hotline operators and travelled across multiple suburbs to complete deliveries. These individuals often moved quickly and avoided unnecessary contact, limiting their exposure and keeping interactions brief. Above them were coordinators responsible for arranging the supply of substances, maintaining storage sites, and ensuring that couriers had access to vehicles or other transport. These coordinators played a crucial role in monitoring police presence in the area and adjusting routes or storage locations when necessary. Their decisions shaped the overall efficiency of the operation, allowing the network to maintain momentum even when external pressures increased. At a higher tier were individuals responsible for overseeing supply chains and sourcing materials. Police have alleged that this group handled the logistical challenges of moving substances into and across Sydney, often relying on localised support networks that assisted with distribution or storage. These individuals operated with greater caution, avoiding direct contact with hotline operators or couriers. Their involvement focused on ensuring that supply remained stable, adjusting quantities based on demand, and arranging backup systems when disruptions occurred. This tiered structure demonstrated how the network managed to operate consistently while maintaining separation between different functional areas. To support these operations, the network required a financial system capable of handling large volumes of unregistered income without attracting attention. Investigators identified several methods used to launder proceeds and sustain financial stability. Cash remained central to the system, with couriers collecting payments directly or through drop-off points that shifted regularly. Once collected, cash was pooled and transferred to individuals responsible for managing the funds. These money managers used a combination of informal transfer systems, small business fronts, and personal accounts to disperse cash into channels less likely to trigger scrutiny. In some cases, cash was broken into smaller amounts and moved across several people to obscure its origin. The network also used long-standing cultural and family networks to facilitate overseas transfers, taking advantage of trust-based systems operating outside conventional banking channels. These methods were not unique to this group, but were consistent with practices seen across organised crime networks in Australia. Their effectiveness depended on discretion, loyalty, and the ability to avoid inconsistencies that might attract attention from financial regulators. The network's sophistication extended beyond the hotline and financial systems. Investigators noted that the group demonstrated an ability to adapt quickly to law enforcement strategies, altering communication methods, replacing compromised devices, and changing operational routines when required. Whenever police seized phones or arrested individuals involved in lower-level roles, replacements were introduced rapidly to maintain continuity. Storage sites shifted frequently, sometimes within days, as coordinators monitored police activity or community reporting. Vehicles used for deliveries were rotated to reduce recognizability, and couriers were instructed to vary travel routes to avoid predictable patterns. Police also identified a reliance on encrypted messaging systems and disposable SIM cards, which reduced the amount of accessible digital evidence. These tools provided layers of protection that complicated investigations, requiring more extensive surveillance and data analysis to identify patterns. The group's ability to integrate technology into operational routines reflected a broader trend within modern organised crime networks, where digital tools play a central role in maintaining anonymity and efficiency. At the same time, the network used traditional methods to preserve trust and cohesion. Many operational roles were assigned through long-standing relationships, with individuals chosen based on familiarity rather than external recruitment. This reduced the risk of infiltration and strengthened the internal structure. The reliance on family connections, shared backgrounds, and long-term associations helped maintain loyalty, which in turn supported the network's continuity during periods of heightened law enforcement attention. The combination of a refined hotline model, coordinated roles, financial management systems, and adaptive strategies enabled the network to operate in ways that were both expansive and discreet. Its integration into ordinary suburban environments made detection difficult, particularly when activities were designed to blend into the routines of daily life. The operational design reflected a blend of technology, interpersonal trust, and strategic planning, demonstrating how organised crime could function within areas that otherwise appeared stable and familiar. The sophistication of the model highlighted the significance of the allegations later brought forward by investigators, revealing a network capable of sustained activity through coordinated, low-visibility operations supported by multiple layers of personnel. The conflict between the groups associated with the Alameddine and Hamzi names did not emerge suddenly, nor did it originate from a single identifiable incident. Instead, the tension developed over time through a series of inconsistencies in relationships, territorial disputes, and shifts in influence across several Western Sydney suburbs. These inconsistencies were not initially obvious outside the circles directly involved. Police material later indicated that early disagreements centred around issues of respect, perceived slights, and the competitive nature of the illicit drug market. As each group expanded its operations, the space in which both functioned became increasingly narrow, setting the stage for friction that grew steadily more pronounced. Early conflicts appeared to revolve around contested territory, overlapping customer bases, and disputes involving younger associates who moved fluidly between different social groups. These tensions were compounded by personal rivalries that escalated into broader disputes once senior figures became involved. What may have begun as disagreements between individuals gradually evolved into a sustained conflict between two networks, each seeking to assert its presence in the local criminal landscape. Investigators later described the progression from inconsistent interactions to entrenched hostility as a gradual but unmistakable shift, marked by an increase in targeted acts that suggested coordination and planning. As the conflict entered a more active phase, a pattern of retaliatory incidents surfaced. These events, although described by police as targeted, took place in public settings and at times of day when families were likely to be present. The tactics used varied, but often involved rapid, controlled actions intended to intimidate or eliminate specific individuals. Firearms were the most common method, with offenders approaching locations associated with their rivals before fleeing within seconds. While the details of these incidents remain subject to legal processes, reporting has indicated that some were carried out near residential streets, service stations, or car parks, areas that typically saw regular community activity. The repeated nature of these actions demonstrated the escalating seriousness of the conflict. Each attack created conditions for a response, and the expectation of retaliation became an embedded part of the cycle. Individuals on both sides appeared to perceive these retaliations as necessary for maintaining status, preventing loss of influence, or responding to perceived disrespect. This psychology reinforced the longevity of the conflict, as each group interpreted inaction as vulnerability. Police noted that the pressure to respond quickly contributed to a pattern in which incidents occurred in relatively close succession. The conflict was sustained further by the involvement of younger individuals, some of whom viewed the dispute not only as a matter of group loyalty, but as a means of establishing their own standing. Social dynamics within the broader criminal environment meant that reputations could be built or damaged based on participation in retaliatory acts. This dynamic contributed to the ongoing nature of the hostility, as younger associates, influenced by older figures, or by the culture that had developed around the conflict, became participants in events they may not have fully understood. At the same time, senior individuals often distanced themselves from direct involvement, adding complexity to police efforts to trace responsibility. The prolonged cycle of retaliation created a growing sense of unease among residents in affected suburbs. While the incidents were targeted, the fact that they occurred within ordinary communities heightened public concern. Families living in areas where shootings occurred reported feeling unsettled by the sudden presence of police cordons, forensic teams, and emergency vehicles. The unpredictability of the incidents, combined with their proximity to homes, parks, and shopping areas, led many to question how deeply the conflict had penetrated the places they considered safe. These concerns were not limited to those directly affected. Reports indicated that some residents changed their routines, avoided certain streets after dark, or altered the times at which they left home or returned. The routine nature of suburban life was disrupted each time a new incident occurred. Community leaders expressed worry that repeated exposure to such events could lead to a broader erosion of trust, particularly among families who had settled in the area seeking stability. The conflict also placed strain on local businesses, many of which relied on regular foot traffic and community engagement. Some shop owners reported customers avoiding certain locations after high-profile incidents, while others found themselves fielding questions from concerned families. The perception of risk, even when incidents were not directed at the public, created a climate that was difficult to manage. Schools, community centres, and religious organisations in the affected suburbs took steps to reassure families, acknowledging the tension without contributing to alarm. Police, for their part, increased patrols and engaged with community groups to provide information and guidance. Their communication aimed to balance transparency with the need to avoid amplifying fear. Officers emphasised that the conflict was confined to specific individuals, but acknowledged the seriousness of incidents occurring so close to homes and daily routines. Over time, repeated acts of retaliation created a type of psychological fatigue within the community. Residents grew accustomed to the sound of helicopters overhead or the sight of blocked-off streets, even as they wished for a return to normality. This prolonged exposure to tension had a quiet but significant impact on how people viewed their neighbourhoods. Some expressed disappointment that areas once known for their strong sense of community had become associated with organised crime. Others worried about the long-term effects on young people growing up amid these events. Despite the distress caused by the conflict, many residents remained resilient, drawing on community networks to support one another. Neighbours checked on each other after major incidents, and families relied on established social bonds to navigate periods of uncertainty. This community resilience stood in contrast to the violence attributed to the groups involved, highlighting the difference between the broader population and the individuals whose actions contributed to the conflict. The sustained nature of the hostility between the networks attributed to the Alameddine and Hamzi names demonstrated how criminal disputes can extend far beyond their initial causes, especially when they intersect with issues of influence, reputation, and control. The cycle of retaliation, fueled by long-standing tensions and carried out through targeted acts, created a prolonged period of instability within affected suburbs. While investigators worked to understand the drivers of the conflict, communities lived with the consequences, navigating the challenges posed by violence occurring close to their homes and families. The period between 2021 and 2024 marked a turning point in the conflict involving the groups associated with the Alameddine and Hamzi names, producing several incidents that shaped both the direction of police investigations and the public perception of organised crime across Western Sydney. One of the most defining events occurred in October 2021, when Tawfiq Hamza and his teenage son, Salim, were shot in Guildford. The incident took place in the early morning as the pair prepared to leave their home. Police later stated that the attack appeared to be targeted, reflecting an escalation in tensions between the rival networks. The deaths drew widespread attention not only for their immediate impact, but for what they signified within the broader conflict. Investigators examined the circumstances carefully, noting that the act demonstrated a level of planning and knowledge of the victims' routines. The shooting accelerated efforts by law enforcement to understand the structure of the dispute, prompting targeted operations aimed at preventing further violence. For many residents, the deaths of a father and son highlighted the severity of the conflict, reinforcing concerns about the proximity of organised crime to everyday life. In the months following the Guildford shooting, another significant development emerged when police uncovered an alleged plot to kill Ibrahim Hamza, a known figure within the Hamzi group. According to police statements tendered to court, individuals linked to the Alameddine network were alleged to have planned the attack, coordinating surveillance, vehicle movements, and potential escape routes. The alleged plot was intercepted before it could be carried out, with officers arresting several individuals and seizing items that investigators believed were connected to the preparation of a targeted attack. The case demonstrated the level of tension sustained between the two groups and the lengths to which individuals were allegedly prepared to go in order to maintain influence or retaliate against perceived threats. Police noted that the planning process involved multiple layers of communication and operational roles, highlighting the broader organisational capacity of those involved. The prevention of the alleged attack did little to ease the underlying hostility, but it provided investigators with valuable insight into the methods and structure of the network. While the conflict continued to influence criminal dynamics in Western Sydney, parallel investigations into drug supply operations intensified. Throughout 2022, police executed multiple raids targeting locations believed to be linked to the distribution of prohibited substances. These operations resulted in the seizure of significant quantities of drugs, cash, vehicles, and electronic devices. Investigators focused on the logistical systems that allowed large-scale supply to continue across several suburbs. They identified storage sites used to house materials before distribution, as well as residential properties adapted to function as temporary processing or packaging facilities. Many of these properties were situated in quiet streets where the activities taking place inside were not immediately apparent to neighbours. The raids formed part of a broader effort to disrupt the flow of drugs across Western Sydney, with police seeking to identify the individuals responsible for coordinating supply chains and managing financial transactions. In 2023, investigations expanded further as law enforcement continued to uncover evidence of sophisticated drug networks operating in connection with individuals linked to the Alameddine group. Reports from that period indicate that police targeted mid-level organisers who were believed to have managed couriers, supervised packaging operations, or coordinated payments. The disruption of these activities revealed the network's ability to adapt quickly, with new individuals stepping into roles vacated by those arrested. Police noted that changes in communication methods, particularly the use of encrypted messaging services and disposable devices, contributed to the challenge of tracking key figures. Despite these difficulties, sustained operations throughout 2023 produced several arrests and provided authorities with additional insight into how the distribution system functioned. By early 2024, the focus of law enforcement turned sharply toward the phone-based distribution network that had become one of the most significant components of the organization's operations. The hotline system, which operated through dedicated devices used solely to receive and manage orders, had expanded to a scale rarely seen in metropolitan Sydney. When investigators executed a coordinated series of raids targeting the phones, operators, and associated properties, they reported seizing devices that collectively contained records linked to approximately 50,000 customer interactions. Police emphasized that not all of these contacts represented active customers, but noted that the scale demonstrated a level of organization more consistent with a commercial enterprise than with traditional street dealing. The 2024 operation uncovered extensive evidence of how the hotline system functioned, showing a pattern of shift-based operation, detailed order logging, and rapid dispatching of couriers. The devices frequently changed hands to reduce traceability, and operators maintained minimal personal information to limit exposure. Police also examined the financial infrastructure supporting the hotline. Large sums of cash were seized during raids, along with records believed to document money movements between operators, couriers, and individuals responsible for higher-level coordination. Investigators identified methods of cash handling that involved multiple intermediaries, designed to obscure the origin of funds and integrate proceeds into legitimate or semi-legitimate channels. During the raids, officers discovered several properties functioning as operational hubs for the hotline. Some contained packaging materials, scales, and substances ready for distribution. Others housed communication tools or acted as meeting points for couriers. Police stated that the spread of these locations across multiple suburbs demonstrated an effort to reduce the impact of any single raid on the overall operation. The dismantling of the hotline network in 2024 represented one of the most significant disruptions to the group's drug supply operations. However, the investigation also revealed the network's long-standing ability to adapt. Police noted that the hotline system had been operational for years, with earlier versions of the phones replaced as necessary to avoid detection. The longevity of the system reflected not only organizational planning, but also access to a steady flow of individuals willing to participate in different roles, from answering calls to transporting goods. Each major incident between 2021 and 2024 contributed to a clearer picture of how the network functioned and how deeply the conflict and supply systems had become embedded within parts of Western Sydney. The fatal shooting of Tufik and Salim Hamza, the alleged plot against Ibrahim Hamza, the ongoing drug operations uncovered in 2022 and 2023, and the seizure of hotline phones in 2024 collectively demonstrated the scale and complexity of the group's activities. While law enforcement responded with increasingly coordinated operations, the consistency of incidents throughout this period highlighted the resilience of the structures investigators sought to dismantle. These cases, taken together, formed a timeline that reflected both the escalation of conflict and the strength of the organizational framework supporting the network. As the scale of the conflict and associated criminal activity became clearer, police across New South Wales intensified their response through a series of targeted operations that sought to disrupt the structure attributed to the network. One of the earliest and most significant of these efforts was Strike Force Wessex, a dedicated unit formed to investigate the activities and connections of individuals believed to be involved in coordinated drug supply and violent incidents across Western Sydney. Wessex brought together detectives with experience in organised crime, forensic analysis, and intelligence gathering, allowing for a multifaceted approach that combined surveillance, data collection, and targeted arrests. Investigators working under Wessex analysed patterns across suburbs, identifying properties, vehicles, and individuals who appeared repeatedly in connection with specific incidents. Their work produced several coordinated raids that resulted in arrests and the seizure of drugs, cash, and mobile phones, which later became central to broader investigations into the hotline model. Wessex also placed emphasis on understanding the social dynamics that shaped the network, allowing detectives to map relationships and identify the roles played by various individuals. The strike force developed a clearer picture of how the network functioned and passed its findings to other specialist units that later built upon its work. As incidents between rival groups escalated, the NS Sports Police Force established Task Force Erebus to investigate the shootings, firebombings, and retaliatory acts linked to the conflict between the networks associated with the Alameddine and Hamza names. Erebus focused specifically on violent incidents, treating each as part of a larger pattern rather than isolated events. Detectives reviewed CCTV footage, analysed ballistic evidence, and tracked vehicle movements to establish timelines and identify possible links between different attacks. The task force also examined the role of younger associates who moved between locations in the lead-up to incidents, recognising that these individuals often played a key part in planning or facilitating the actions of others. The approach taken by Erebus highlighted the need to address not only the individuals alleged to have carried out violent acts, but also the network of support that enabled them to occur. Investigators faced the challenge of dealing with tight-knit groups that relied on loyalty, shared histories, and community ties. This environment made it difficult to obtain witness statements, as many residents feared retaliation or did not want to become involved in matters perceived as internal disputes. Erebus responded by expanding intelligence capabilities, increasing community engagement, and working closely with other specialised units to build cases that could be supported by forensic evidence rather than witness testimony. One of the most visible components of the broader police response was the Raptor Squad, a unit established to target organised criminal groups and enforce compliance through high-visibility policing. Raptor officers conducted roadside checks, business inspections, bail compliance operations, and vehicle stops, focusing on individuals associated with outlaw motorcycle gangs and organised crime networks. Their presence in Western Sydney became a regular feature of the law enforcement landscape, providing a deterrent effect and placing visible pressure on individuals believed to be linked to ongoing criminal activity. Raptor's approach relied on maintaining constant pressure, disrupting day-to-day movements, and reducing the ability of individuals to coordinate without drawing attention. While some criticized the unit's aggressive tactics, police leadership defended the strategy as necessary to address groups that operated behind layers of secrecy and intimidation. The combined influence of Wessex, Erebus, and Raptor created a sustained enforcement environment that significantly increased the difficulty of coordinating large-scale operations within the network. Beyond individual raids and targeted arrests, police adopted several specialized tactics designed to counter the network's use of technology and compartmentalized structures. Digital analysis became a critical component, with investigators examining seized mobile phones, encrypted messaging applications, and financial records. This work required cooperation between local detectives, cybercrime units, and federal agencies, as many communication channels extended beyond state boundaries. Data analysts traced patterns in phone activity, identifying times of peak communication, frequently contacted numbers, and geographic markers that suggested movement across key areas. This information provided insight into how different parts of the network interacted, even when individuals avoided direct contact. Undercover operations also formed part of the strategy, although these were limited by the tight internal structure of the network and the reliance on long-standing personal connections. When infiltration was not feasible, police relied on physical surveillance, tracking suspects across suburbs and monitoring meeting points used for exchanges or coordination. Surveillance teams documented movements, photographed interactions, and recorded patterns that later supported search warrants or arrest operations. The legal framework surrounding organized crime also evolved during this period. Amendments to NSAA legislation introduced new powers aimed at restricting the ability of criminal groups to operate openly. Consorting laws were strengthened to limit the capacity of individuals with criminal histories to associate with one another without legitimate purpose. Firearms laws were updated to address the increasing use of illegally supplied weapons in targeted attacks. Additional provisions allowed police to seize unexplained wealth, restrict access to encrypted devices, and apply for extended surveillance warrants in cases involving sophisticated networks. These legal changes reflected a recognition by lawmakers that traditional policing alone was insufficient to address the challenges posed by complex, technology-enabled criminal groups. The combination of legislative reform, targeted strike forces, and specialist squads created a layered response that addressed both the immediate threat of violence and the underlying operations that supported the network's activities. This coordinated approach marked a significant shift in how law enforcement tackled organized crime, demonstrating the need for sustained, multifaceted strategies in environments where criminal activity intersects with community life. By 2024, police in New South Wales began speaking publicly about significant progress against the network associated with the Alameddine name, with senior officers stating that major operations had cleaned up large parts of Sydney's organised crime landscape. These comments reflected the scale of the work undertaken across multiple years, during which investigators dismantled key sections of the hotline system, arrested several operational figures, and disrupted supply chains that had previously allowed the network to function with consistency. While these achievements marked a notable shift in the balance of organised crime across Western Sydney, the reality on the ground remained more complex than any single declaration could capture. The structure associated with the network did not disappear entirely following the major raids and arrests. Instead, what remained appeared fragmented, with smaller groups operating at reduced capacity. These remnants lacked the cohesion and reach that had defined the earlier version of the network, but they still posed challenges for police attempting to prevent renewed activity, officers continued to monitor individuals who had previously occupied mid-level roles, recognizing that experience, connections, and familiarity with the operational systems made them potential candidates for rebuilding elements of the organization. Some attempted to re-establish contact with former associates, while others shifted into parallel criminal activities that required less coordination. One of the ongoing complications for investigators was the continued presence of individuals overseas who were subject to warrants or remained persons of interest. Reports indicated that certain figures allegedly connected to decision-making roles had not returned to Australia, and their absence limited the ability of police to finalise some aspects of their investigations. These individuals, operating outside jurisdictions that easily cooperated with Australian authorities, represented unresolved elements of the broader picture. Their capacity to influence events within Sydney diminished over time, but did not disappear entirely, as long-standing relationships and communication channels remained difficult to monitor comprehensively. The presence of associates abroad also created uncertainty within the remaining parts of the network, as individuals in Sydney could not confidently predict whether leadership would re-emerge or whether responsibility would continue to shift among smaller local groups. Despite the disruptions, police observed signs that some branches of the former network attempted to maintain limited operations through simplified models. These efforts lacked the scale of the original hotline system, but they demonstrated that demand for illicit substances remained, and smaller operators were prepared to fill the gap. These groups tended to operate with less sophistication, relying on personal networks rather than large customer bases. They also avoided the communication structures that had previously exposed the larger network to police analysis. This shift made them harder to track in some respects, but also reduced their capacity for widespread influence. Alongside these smaller operations, police identified early indications of what they described as regenerative behaviour among individuals formerly associated with the network. This regeneration did not reflect a coordinated resurgence, but rather the natural tendency of criminal groups to reorganise when opportunities arise. Individuals who had previously held logistics or support roles demonstrated interest in rebuilding connections, testing markets, or re-establishing routes disrupted by earlier operations. These attempts occurred quietly, often involving informal gatherings or encrypted communication, rather than the structured systems that once characterized the network. Detectives monitored these developments closely, seeking to intervene before fragmented activity transitioned into sustained group behaviour. At the community level, residents across Western Sydney expressed mixed reactions to the ongoing situation. Many welcomed the visible reduction in high-profile incidents, noting calmer streets and fewer large-scale police operations. Others remained cautious, aware that organised crime rarely disappears entirely, and that unresolved tensions, overseas figures, and lingering associates could influence future developments. This cautious optimism reflected a broader understanding among residents that while policing efforts had significantly reduced the network's operational strength, the social and economic factors that had supported its growth remained present in parts of the region. From a law enforcement perspective, the years following the major strikes against the network were characterized by vigilance rather than closure. Officers continued to focus on prevention, surveillance, and intelligence gathering to ensure that any attempts to rebuild the organization were identified early. They maintained an emphasis on targeting unexplained wealth, monitoring known associates, and strengthening community relationships to improve reporting of suspicious activity. The environment in 2024 and 2025 therefore reflected a landscape shaped by both disruption and possibility, where the legacy of the network continued to influence policing strategies even as its operational power declined. The influence of the network associated with the Alameddine name extended beyond criminal operations and into the everyday experience of communities across Western Sydney. For many residents, the conflict and the activities linked to the group contributed to a broader sense of uncertainty, particularly in suburbs where incidents occurred near homes, schools, and local businesses. These areas had long been defined by their diversity and resilience, shaped by generations of families who built lives around work, community centres, and neighbourhood routines. When violence or large-scale police operations appeared in these environments, the disruption was felt not only in the immediate aftermath, but through a lingering awareness that organised crime had grown close to familiar spaces. Local businesses faced challenges during the height of police activity. Some noticed fluctuations in customer behaviour, with residents avoiding certain areas following high-profile incidents. Others found themselves answering questions from concerned families or navigating temporary road closures and operational restrictions. While most businesses continued operating normally, the presence of criminal networks in the background created additional pressure on small enterprises that relied on steady community engagement. In this way, the conflict and the network's activities became an economic issue as well as a policing matter, influencing foot traffic, investment confidence, and perceptions of safety in key commercial pockets. Residents reported a range of emotional responses as events unfolded over the years. Many expressed frustration that their suburbs, known for their cultural strength and sense of collective identity, were being associated with criminal activity. Others spoke of quiet concern, particularly parents who worried about the potential exposure of young people to the influences surrounding organised crime. The fear rarely took the form of panic. Instead, it appeared as a steady, measured apprehension that shaped daily routines. People adjusted the times they walked through certain streets, paid closer attention to unusual activity, or relied more heavily on community networks for reassurance. These reactions highlighted the psychological impact that organised crime can have even when the public is not the direct target of violence. Criminologists observing the situation offered insight into the deeper social and structural factors that contributed to the rise of the network. They pointed to long-term economic pressures, intergenerational disadvantage, and the vulnerabilities created by rapid population growth. Many experts emphasized that organised crime groups often gain traction in areas where young people feel disconnected from stable pathways, or where community institutions struggle to keep pace with social change. They noted that the network's use of technology, combined with its reliance on local knowledge and interpersonal trust, reflected a modern form of organised crime distinct from older, more hierarchical models. This newer structure allowed for faster adaptation, reduced visibility, and increased resilience, making it more difficult for law enforcement and communities to respond effectively. Political responses to the situation included calls for strengthened legislation, improved community programs, and enhanced cooperation between state and federal agencies. Policymakers debated the balance between enforcement and prevention, recognizing that while targeted police action was essential, long-term change required addressing the conditions that allowed such networks to grow. Measures such as consorting laws, increased penalties for firearm offences, and expanded surveillance powers were introduced, alongside investments in youth outreach programs, employment initiatives, and community-based support networks. These combined approaches reflected an understanding that organised crime is shaped not only by individual behaviour, but by the broader environment in which individuals live. The trajectory of the Alameddine network provided a case study in how a family with ordinary community ties could become associated, through certain individuals, with a complex criminal structure. It illustrated how relationships, economic pressures, and shifting social landscapes intersect to create conditions where organised crime can emerge. The story also emphasized the importance of recognizing that criminal behavior within a family does not define the family as a whole, nor does it reflect the broader communities in which those individuals live. These distinctions became central to public conversations as residents, experts, and community leaders worked to avoid reinforcing stereotypes or deepening social divisions. The deeper causes behind the network's rise were rooted in a mix of opportunity, disconnection, and the evolving dynamics of urban life. Access to fast money, combined with limited employment prospects for some young people, made involvement in criminal activity appear attractive or achievable. The spread of encrypted communication tools provided new ways to coordinate without exposure, allowing groups to operate with a level of efficiency previously unavailable. These factors, combined with long-standing interpersonal ties and cultural networks, created an environment in which organized crime could take root and expand. The question of whether Rafat Alameddine, who remained overseas throughout much of the investigation period, will ever be apprehended remains unresolved. Police have stated that warrants remain active and that international cooperation continues, but practical limitations pose significant challenges. His continued absence symbolizes the broader difficulty of addressing cross-border criminal networks that rely on both distance and local influence to maintain operations. For many observers, the unresolved nature of his status serves as a reminder of the complexities faced by law enforcement in an era where borders do little to restrict communication or influence. The broader effort to combat organised crime in Australia continues to evolve. Agencies now place greater emphasis on technology, intelligence-led policing, and early intervention strategies aimed at reducing the appeal of criminal groups. Collaborative task forces, strengthened legislation, and community partnerships form the framework for a long-term response that seeks not only to disrupt criminal activity, but to prevent its re-emergence. The final lesson drawn from the events surrounding the network is not one of inevitability, but of complexity. The story demonstrates how organised crime can grow within familiar suburbs, how it can adapt to pressure, and how communities can respond with resilience even in the face of prolonged tension. It underscores the importance of persistent enforcement, sustained community support, and an ongoing commitment to addressing the social conditions that allow criminal networks to form. Above all, it highlights the value of vigilance, transparency, and continued dialogue, offering a final message that understanding the roots of organised crime is essential to preventing its future return.